Honor everybody's time, and it's important that you're here, and as people come in, we'll integrate them in. Okay, so I'm Tony Bird, and I'm the superintendent of the Summit School District. It's an honor to be your superintendent, or the superintendent. All right, so you all, I'm here tonight to talk a little bit about our master plan and to get some community input on that plan. And what that basically means is we want to make sure we know from our community the best way to use the resources that we have to serve your children. And so tonight's a chance for you to offer that input. Our CFO, Kara Drake, will talk a little bit about how this builds up to a bond, potentially a bond. I'm going to talk a little bit about the big picture. Hope's going to speak a bit, Sarah's going to speak a bit, give you a bunch of information, and then we're going to give you a chance to ask us questions and engage in conversation. So our purpose is to share our district needs, listen to your perspective on those needs, collect your input, and take it back to a planning group that's helping us think about, most specifically, our facilities and our land and how to make those even better. This is a continuation of 2016, what we call a master plan, which is the way we think about all of our facilities and land. And so now we're moving forward to consider that into the future. We restarted this in 2022. Western Spaces, which is Sarah. Let's give it up for Sarah. Let's have some energy in here, people. All right? It's helping us with our housing needs. And specifically, we're thinking about the cost of living here and how we can support housing for staff. And then that's, I think, supposed to be Wold Architects right there, right? But World sounds good. You're global. That's Hobe. Let's give it up for a Hobe. Who's going to help us think about our building needs, including this particular school. So that's important for you. A little bit of background is that we have a strategic plan. We have a vision. We want every student to graduate from this district prepared for the world and to be successful in the world. And we have something called a graduate profile. The short version of that is we want our students to be courageous and curious, your students, and globally minded and growth-oriented, so flexible and prepared. And they need really great academic skills to be able to do that, but they also need to be able to care about other people, work across lines of difference, be flexible. That's our big graduate profile for the community. And then we have 3 focus areas for you. One is academic and personal success. A second is family and community partnerships. And a third is equity-seeking systems, which essentially means that any student who needs more support is getting that support so you can graduate ready. So that's the background. So when we get into talking about our facilities and our land, be thinking a little bit too about if we're going to get our students graduating with that profile, or your kids, and also through those pillars, what are the implications for housing and facilities and land? I'm going to turn it over to Kara Drake. Let's give it up to Kara Drake here.
Okay, so this is a graph of our bond payments. So when we, as a school district, issue bonds, what we do is we ask the taxpayers in our community to allow us to basically take out a loan that we repay back over time. So as we pay off previous funding, we have a drop in our bond payments. So that's what we're showing in the graph here. You can see in 2024 will be the last payment on the 2012 bond issuance, and we'll have some drop in our bond payments. So when we think about capital planning for our schools and potential needs that we have coming up, we know that that is an opportunity that we could go back to the voters in our community and ask them to approve some additional funding to fund these projects. So that is kind of why we are working hard to do our best planning now, so that if we determine that we have needs that we need some funding for, we can take those out to the voters in 2024.
Capacity and demographics. This is another thing that we typically want to look at, when you're thinking about the future. Where is the district going? Is it growing? Is it declining? And you can see the line, the blue line there, is the number of students that the district has per year. It goes from 2013 to 2023, so it's 10 years of enrollment. You can see that there was a lot of growth in 14, 15, 16, then it kind of stabilized. And you can see the dip during COVID, but you can also see that the trend line of growth continues. It's not a lot of growth though. It's not like you're needing to open new schools every 2 years, every 3 years, like some districts do, by the way. You are actually, according to a demographer, I'm going to show you what the demographer thinks. You're at about 84% capacity, which is not excessive additional. You don't have excessive additional capacity. It's actually probably the right percentage. And there's a projected decline of 0.7 to 5% over the next 10 years. That's what the demographer is projecting. So again, this is important to understand because for planning purposes, you're not adding space. You need more classrooms, but you do need to be thinking about how to get better, how to invest in what you have, rather than again building new space. Another important piece of data there is that workforce housing, which is a lot of housing going on in the district right now, it's only producing about 0.3 students per unit. So that's also not a very high number. Like in growing areas, you see 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, and that means growth. This is probably again slight decline over time. Again, not a lot of decline. So we're thinking for the purposes of master plan this year. Oh yes, yes, and I'm trying to capture everybody here. I'll be attentive to the camera. For the purpose of the master plan, we're saying the enrollment is going to be stable for the next 10 years. So we have what we have, and we're thinking about how to make that better. The planning process. So that dashed line you see there is pretty much where we're at right now. We haven't started to look at opportunities or solutions yet, but we've gathered a lot of data. We know a lot about the state of the buildings. We know a lot about the needs for housing, for example, that Sarah's going to talk about later. And we know we've been having conversations about the values of the school district too, which, and we do that just to understand what the planning guiding principles look like. We have copies. We're not going to go through that right now, but we have printed copies of the guiding principles floating around. And the strategic plan, for example, is right there. I mean, equity, for example. Last time we were doing planning in 2016, 2017, the issue was capacity. You didn't have enough capacity in your secondary schools, middle school and high school to accommodate the kids that were moving through the system. So that's why the additions at the middle school and the high school. This round, I would say there's been a lot of focus on equity. So how can we make sure everybody has the same, I guess the same infrastructure, same facilities, same spaces, so that, again, we're equitable throughout the district. So we are, tonight, again, needing to hear from you on what perspectives you have on any specific school, any specific program. That's what we want to do after this brief presentation. We're going to break. We're going to have 3 stations here. We're going to talk about the 3 important things that we're talking about tonight, which is building condition. It's going to be back there, and I'll show you what we have there. There's a lot of information we've gathered on that. We're going to talk about programming and adequacy. We're going to be on this side, and then housing is going to be back here. But just to show you what we've been doing and the data you're going to see on the boards. Regarding building condition, there's an index that we use. It's used in the industry that helps you assess the condition of a building. It's the facility condition index. And that's basically the cost of efficiencies divided by the cost of replacement. So it gives you an index and tells you, where your asset, where your building is at. And you're going to see there's some actually good things to celebrate. From the last bond, 2016 to 2023, there were a lot of investments in infrastructure. That's reflected in that FCI, that index. For example, in Summit Cove, going from 35 to 25. that means there was an investment in infrastructure that lowered that index, or reduced the amount of deficiencies in that building. So you can see the green, yellow, red, the thirds in those graphs, those dials. And you can think about the green being, well, okay, I mean, that doesn't mean you don't have any issues in the building. There are still, things with asphalt, typically there will be some mechanical issues, maybe some roofing issues, but in the aggregate, it's not a lot, right? That's what green means. If you think about yellow, you're right there. You're in the 50, 60%. But if you get into the red, is when you really start to think about what are you going to do with your asset. It's when, I guess we use the analogy of a car too, when you take it to the mechanic and the repairs are a lot of money, and you start to think, well, is it time for a new car, right? It's similar with buildings, because all the systems break also in a building. So here you're going to see what what we've been having a lot of conversation on in these planning meetings is Breckenridge Elementary. Breckenridge has structural code deficiencies, I'm going to say. They're not, it's a building that's built okay, but it was built in the 70s under a different code. When we assess that building under current code, it's not meeting snow drift loads. So that's something that the district has been aware of for many years now, and it's been managing it by shoveling the snow when it gets to be of a certain thickness. So that's something that needs to be addressed. And when you start to get into structural issues with the building, you really start to push the FCI into the red. And you can see every other building is in the green, but Breck Elementary is the one in the red. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I believe we did improvements to both this building and Breck Elementary.
Yes.
A while ago. And both these buildings, I believe, were built at the same time.
This one is the same exact architect and time as Frisco. Breck Elementary is a little bit older and different, but same era, yeah, 70s.
And so the work they did on that building 5-6 years ago, that wasn't to code, it was just some spatial improvements?
In where? In Breck?
Did we do?
Yeah, Breck hasn't gotten the fixes with structural, no.
Okay.
Yes. I believe these two, Frisco and Dillon have gotten some structural improvements over time. So again, you can fix those things too, right? You can invest in fixing the thing, the specific system, but the other thing you have to think about is, is a building accommodating instruction for the 21st century, or is it still trapped in the 70s? And we've done a lot to that too, like Frisco, this building, Breck not so much. But opening up the spaces, opening up walls, creating breakout, areas for teachers and students, all of that can also happen. But again, you can see that the issue there is Breck. And again, there are deficiencies and things to fix in the other buildings as well. Now, programming and adequacy. I'm going to go quickly on this one because there's a lot, and it's also on the boards. So when you get up, you can go there and see it. But on programming and adequacy, we've been talking to principals, and it's basically an adequacy issue is when the building is getting in the way of education. You're trying to do your job as a teacher, you're trying to do, or the building's trying to do its job as a school, but it's already outdated or things are getting in the way. That's what you're going to see here. We also met with Security, Technology, and Food Services district-wide and identified the potential projects that may be there too. And we already prioritized projects, which is, again, what's on the boards. So quickly, I'm going to go through every single building here. At the high school, ungender bathrooms are needed. That may actually mean a small addition to the building. There's some auditorium issues, internet. Reliability is actually potentially a district-wide issue that we need to investigate a little more because you can't really learn and teach in modern schools without the internet anymore, right? And that's an issue that's been reported by a lot of the principals. And then the athletic infrastructure at the high school needs some upgrading as well. And CTE opportunities, you're going to see that there. Middle school, really, there's nothing really big at the middle school. Most of these issues are small, camera coverage, lighting at the auditorium, some heating and lighting issues. But all of this is, again, nothing really, really big, which is, again, reflected on the green, too, right? I mean, the buildings are in good shape for the most part. At Frisco, actually, we're standing in the cafeteria space that was built, designed and built for Dillon Valley, and with the two buildings being the same, they don't have this, and they do need it. I mean, it's one of those things where it gets creates problems with scheduling. I mean, I don't know if anybody knows this school well, but what would you do without this space now that you have it? I mean, it's really needed. And back in the day, it wasn't designed like that, but that's one thing that they say they really need. And some intervention spaces, upgrades to the break room, and again, the internet reliability. Upper Blue reported a few things on pre-K playground and site issues, but mostly playground areas. Summit Cove, same with upgrades to the playgrounds, and some site minor issues with ADA and sidewalks. Breckenridge, again, besides the building systems issues that they have going on, they also have site problems. Just pickup, drop-off is pretty messy. It's a problem. They also don't have a dedicated cafeteria like Dillon now has, and they would love to have one. The kitchen is the smallest kitchen in the district, so doing their job there, it gets a little bit challenging. And then the classroom size and layout is a little crazy again, kind of 70s layout, and it hasn't been addressed. So, and we think because of the issues with the building systems, there's approximately 10 years of life expectancy on that building, and it's probably really, it's due for replacement. Dillon Valley, again, we recently invested a lot in this building. I think it was almost $6 million, Kara, right? Just in this building. But there are still some things that could be upgraded, like casework, some wallpaper, some paint. Again, these are cosmetic issues, not huge investments. We have some code rooms, as you get out of the classrooms, that where the HVAC needs to be addressed. But again, all these things are small in comparison to the big ones. Snowy Peaks is the other school that you have in the district. Everybody knows Snowy Peaks. And this is a school in the middle school, the small school in the middle school, that is occupying actually the oldest part of that building. I would say that when it comes to equity, this is a school program that's lacking the most. They don't have an assembly space or a gymnasium because they're very separate from the middle school. So even though the gyms for the middle school are right there, they can't access those gyms. A secure vestibule is being built actually right now. Over the summer, we were working on that, but it was the one school that didn't have a secure vestibule yet. Every other school in the district does. Staff, doesn't have any space to do their job. They don't have a break room. They don't have a work room. So they're typically just sitting, in the middle there with the students when they, preparing their classes and doing their work. They don't have a shop, which is something that they would love to have because of the way they do instruction. That part of the building doesn't have those big spaces. We created a maker space there that they use for light stuff, but they would love to have like power tools and get in there with more purpose, and storage as well. So that was Snowy Peaks. So Snowy Peaks is one school too that we're thinking a lot about at the planning table. Yes?
Opportunity for them to share some of the CTE space with the high school?
That's one conversation we've had. Yeah. And going back to the diagram that I showed you at the beginning, we're starting to think about possibilities. So if you have any thoughts, we want to, there will be post-it notes. So make sure you write something about that, because we want to take that to the planning group. Okay? But yes, that has come up. District-wide, security, you're not in bad shape. Again, you implemented secure vestibules, your camera and security systems are pretty good. There are some improvements that you can make, but for the most part, you're set on that, especially now having done the secure vestibule at Snowy Peaks. Internet reliability is really is going to be potentially one investment that's going to be needed. And again, we're just trying to understand what's going on with that. But as you think about new technologies, VR, AI, all these things I know Tony is a fan of, and starting to think about how that's going to impact education. Well, how is that education going to impact the building is the next question too, right? Because you want the building to be prepared for all of that. And then regarding food services, there are some kitchen equipment issues that have been reported that we're tracking, but nothing too big on that. On adequacy, this is also an interesting idea, and we want to hear from you your thoughts on this. But during one of the programming meetings with district staff, we were reflecting on that growth, that enrollment growth that we saw last year, and how a lot of those families just showed up. Like, from one year to the other, you had how many new kids at the high school, Carrie? Do you remember?
Last year,
Yeah.
we had 30.
30 new kids at the high school level that showed up. So you can imagine, and most of these kids were coming from Spanish-speaking countries too. So they don't have English going into their education. Their families are coming into a new community. They may need a job. They may need additional help with healthcare. So there's an idea on the table right now to start to think about a family welcoming center or family resource center where families could maybe check in and again, get all these services together with community partners. This is not just a district, the district's job, but all other partners. So and this is, I don't know, I think it's a great idea, but we want to hear from you on your thoughts on this too. And that's all I have for building systems and adequacy. Now, any thoughts or questions on that before I pass it on to Sarah?
Thanks, everyone. I'm Sarah McLean with Western Spaces, and I've been working on the housing component of this. I live in Summit County. I have 2 kids at school in Summit County, so very, very familiar with the area. I've been doing housing studies for over 15 years now, so I have a lot of communities I've worked in. This is just because I love maps. It's just a map of the county, and if you were to zoom in, every little black dot is a housing unit. So those are all the housing units in Summit County. So if we want to go on, we'll talk a little bit about what we've been working on. So we did an employee household survey that we distributed. It was just before, I believe, just after or before spring break of last year. And we kept it in the field for about 3 weeks. And we received about 393 responses, which is close to a 66% response rate. And I don't know if any of you here received it or took it, but it was very in-depth. And it took a little thought and a little time, and so that's a really great response rate for that kind of survey. Usually household community surveys are closer to 25%, 30% response rate. So we felt really good about the data that we got back from that. And so with that, we also looked at the housing market in Summit County to see what's available both for rent and for ownership, and what some of the trends are for what staff is looking at when they're trying to find homes in the county. And so we're going to talk about those today, and then we have the board set up in the back, and we'd like you to come around and talk about the goals and guiding principles that we've laid out, and then think about maybe what some of the priority programs and initiatives might be that could be next steps for this process. Thanks, Hope. So a little bit about what we heard of what staff looks like, what their household composition is. 44% are couples with children, and another 28% are couples without children. If you look a little further down for unrelated roommates, that's only 5%, and that's a little different. You know, countywide, it's going to be a little higher, a lot more unrelated roommates. But for SSD staff, it's primarily couples with children and couples without children. And if you look at whether they own or rent based on how long they've been employed by the Summit School District, typically when they start, they're more likely to rent as they're new to the community. And then as they're here longer, they've been able to transfer into home ownership. And typically around 2 to 5 years is when households start looking to put more roots down in the community and start to want to go from rental into ownership. And so historically, this trend has held true, but given the data that we're seeing now, that may not be an opportunity going forward. You can go ahead, Hope. Looking at payments that staff are making between their rental payment and their ownership payment, based on type, what is interesting here is that renters for similar types are either paying close to the same or more than owners are for their housing payment. And renters overall tend to have lower incomes, and so they tend to be more cost burdened and more stressed by their housing payments. And if we look at household income, you can see where renters primarily fall a lot higher percentage at the lower range, whereas owners tend to fall up towards the higher range. But they're paying similar or more than owners are. And I talked a little bit about cost burden. Cost burden is generally defined as a household that's paying more than 30% of their household income towards their housing payment. And that's it's sort of a national definition. It can vary based on different circumstances, but for this, we've defined it as that. And renters are a lot more likely than owners to be cost burdened. 61% of renters compared to 36% of owners. And if you want to look at cost burden by income, the lower income, which is under 60% AMI, and we'll put some numbers on that in the next slide so you can understand what that is, are a lot more likely to be cost burdened. And so area median income is something that's set by Housing and Urban Development, and it's county-wide, and they update it annually, and it's based on household size. And a lot of housing programs, while it's not the best measure for a community always, they do focus their programs on these measures, and so we've broken it out in this way. And if we want to look at where housing problems fall, first of all, let's classify the problems. So on the top left of staff, 54% are dissatisfied with their current housing. And so that means they're living in poor conditions or overcrowded conditions, or they have forced commuting, or some things along those lines. Another 17% are looking to retire in the next 5 years. And so when they retire, they most likely will stay in the unit that they're in, and bringing new workers into the community will require housing for them to be able to find and live in. And so that's something to keep in mind. And then another 20% strongly agree that they are considering leaving due to the cost of housing. And that was a question on a 1 to 5 rating, and I grabbed the 4 and 5, so strongly considering. But if you grab the agree all the way up, it's closer to 50%. And so it is showing up as a real problem for staff. And then lastly, cost burden, which we discussed. And so if you draw these housing problems out by where the household incomes fall on the range, really the largest category ends up being the 80 to 100% AMI. And that's a household making between $79,841 to $99,800. As far as housing demand goes, that's a little different than need. Demand really is more about people that are in housing and are looking for something different that they can't find. And so looking for demand for rental, the highest demand is between 80 and 120% AMI. And for a 3-person household, they could pay between $2,400 and about $3,000 for the rent. And so if you look down at where the affordability gap is, there really isn't a huge gap in median rent versus what households are able to pay. The real problem is that there's just no availability. There's basically zero vacancy. And so they're saying, hey, I can afford this, but I just can't find anything right now. So looking at how supportive staff is of the school district investing resources in housing, primarily they are very supportive. About 53% said they're very supportive. Another 16% were somewhat supportive, and then it goes down from there. And we got a lot of open-ended comments and a lot of great feedback from staff through the survey. One of the respondents commented, affordable housing keeps teachers in schools. Loss of teachers has a huge effect on student achievement. I've seen a huge brain drain in Summit School District because of lack of affordable housing. We could be recruiting the best and brightest. So staff does say we are supportive of this and we do see it as a problem. Staff was asked, as far as programs go, what they would be willing to support or what they would be willing to use. The highest rated one was home repair and renovation assistance. The next one was down payment assistance to buy a home. Quite a large percentage of staff said they were looking to purchase in the next 5 years. And they do have down payment availability for some of them, but many of them don't. Utility payment assistance, and then the opportunity to rent or purchase a new home. And they are willing to live in a deed-restricted unit or a below market rate unit for rentals. Home buyer education and assistance with security deposit first month's rent. So these are sort of opportunities that are highlighted. You know, we talked a lot about the needs. The needs are definitely there, and here are some opportunities staff is saying these are things that would work for us. Some other opportunities that we have pulled out are resources. The district does have resources, right? Partnerships, this community is very strong in partnerships and on housing and on support services, so there are definitely partnership opportunities. There is a need for rental and homeownership. You know, rental would primarily help people coming into the community, while homeownership would keep them here or keep staff in their current positions. There is support from employees, as we just saw, and there are potential housing programs. There's quite a broad range of opportunities there. So this is sort of a menu of options. Don't try to read it, but just to give you an idea of what we're looking at as far as how to start addressing these needs. And what we've done is we've started out by laying out 2 goals, and we'll talk about them when you come around to the boards. One is regarding housing stability for staff, and the other is looking at new housing opportunities. We've also laid out some guiding principles we'd love your feedback on. And then we're going to start looking at prioritization of housing tools and opportunities. And this is sort of a start of a list to look at and prioritize short-term, long-term. Don't want to touch it, do it right now, you know. And then we'll go into program development implementation following that. So with that, we'd love to open it up to questions for the whole group. And then we can split up and cruise around and look at the boards and have some conversations.